Hey students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Today's aim is causes of U.S. entry into World War I. And here are your objectives. Please pause the video, look these questions over, and get ready to copy some vocab terms and take some notes. So far in this unit, we've been looking at U.S. imperialism at the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. And in the last lesson, you looked at the ways the U.S. exercised control over Latin America. We are going to leave that topic behind now and focus on events that took place between 1914 and 1918 during World War I. Today, we'll look at why the U.S. decided to get involved in World War I, and in the next few lessons, we'll look at some ways that World War I impacted life in America. Let's do a quick review of World War I. It started in 1914 and it ended in 1918. And it was caused by rivalries between European powers who were motivated by feelings of nationalism and a competition for colonies. It was the first major war where Europeans got to show off new deadly military technologies like artillery and poison gas. And it mostly involved a style of war called trench warfare. That's what you see in these pictures. World War I caused terrible destruction of loss and life. And when it was over, a lot of people thought that it had been pointless, and they started to feel disillusioned or pessimistic about the future of the world. When World War I started, the two sides were called the Allies and the Central Powers. We call the first group the Allies because that's the side that the U.S. eventually joined. Those were our allies. And the main allies were, if you look at the map, in beige, Great Britain, France, Italy, and Russia. So those were the countries that fought with the United States. The opposing side was called the Central Powers, and that's in orange on the map. And the main Central Powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Now let's look at how the U.S. got involved. World War I started in 1914, and in that year, the president of the U.S. was Woodrow Wilson. You learned a little bit about Woodrow Wilson earlier because he was one of the progressive presidents during the Progressive Era. When the World War I started, Wilson promised that the U.S. would remain neutral. That means that the U.S. government would not help either side, and the U.S. would stay out of the war. And this is a foreign policy called neutrality, not taking a side. But other events quickly tested the U.S.'s commitment to neutrality. In 1915, a British ship called the Lusitania left New York, heading for England. The Lusitania was not a warship, it was a passenger ship, but it was carrying a cargo of weapons for England. It also had 139 American passengers on board. Germany had warned England that German submarines would attack any British ships, whether they were warships or not. And this policy was called unrestricted submarine warfare. But despite the German warning, the Lusitania set sail anyway. And on May 7th, 1915, a German submarine, or U-boat, torpedoed and sank the Lusitania. Nearly 1,200 people died, including 128 Americans. This attack caused huge outrage in America, but still President Wilson decided to remain neutral and not get involved in the war. Then, 2 years later, U.S. intelligence intercepted a secret telegram that Germany had sent to Mexico, and it was called the Zimmerman telegram. In the Zimmerman telegram, the Germans promised Mexico that if Mexico allied with Germany and attacked the U.S., Germany would help Mexico regain the lands it had lost to the U.S. in the Mexican-American War way back in 1848. Americans were once again outraged at Germany, this time for going behind their backs and trying to get Mexico to attack them. So as a result, the US finally decided to declare war on Germany. And in 1917, the US entered World War I. Another important event that occurred in 1917 was the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was a world-changing event in which communists, known as Bolsheviks, overthrew the Tsars, the king and queen of Russia, and established a new communist country called the Soviet Union. The leader of the Bolsheviks was this man, Vladimir Lenin. You probably learned about him in global history. The Russian Revolution scared a lot of people in the US who opposed communism. And although we're not going to learn more about the Russian Revolution in this unit, it's going to be important later on. So don't forget that year, 1917, the year of the Russian Revolution, which turned Russia into a communist country, the Soviet Union. In 1918, Germany surrendered and World War I ended. The Allies had won. You might have noticed that the US joined the war pretty much right before it ended. As a result, the US got to claim victory, but US soldiers didn't actually suffer much of the awful fighting that the rest of the countries had faced, and no fighting took place in America. If you look at this chart of deaths by country, you can see that compared to the other countries that fought in World War I, the United States lost very few soldiers. The last word for today is conscription, also known as the draft. Conscription is when the government forces citizens to fight in the war, whether they want to or not. In 1917, after the US joined World War I, Congress passed a law called the Selective Service Act, which created a system for conscripting or drafting soldiers. We'll look more at this law in a later lesson. And now it's time to review the objectives. If you don't know the answer to any of them, just rewind the video and look again. And I will see you in class. Bye, students.